Good afternoon, Divanauts. Welcome to Cronista de Indias, yay, the YouTube channel dedicated to Latin American studies, double yay. And triple yay, we're sitting right here in front of a 15th century illuminated Hebrew Talmud manuscript from the Hispanic Society of America. I mean, check it out. I'm only showing this off because they just gifted me a copy, so I'm so excited about it. We're gonna put our little like menorah right here in the center. Okay, so once again, my name is Andrea Lorena Fernandez. I am a professor of Latin American history at Pace University in New York City, and this is Cronista de Indias. Follow me on Instagram for more cultural content throughout the week, aside from the weekly YouTube video. So in the last episode, episode 14, titled Manuela Science, The Failure of Independence and Constitutional Law, 1827, we analyzed the letter that our Manuela sent to the Colombian Council in Lima when she is illegally arrested, where she claims that I remind you that I am a Colombian citizen and that such conduct shows lack of consideration and gratitude due to that nation. So, to free herself from illegal imprisonment, she cites the Peruvian Constitution of 1823, the Universal Rights of Man from the Enlightenment and the French Revolution, and last but not least, the role that Colombia plays in Peru's independence. So she thinks that because Bolivar is technically a Colombian too, then Peruvians ought to be a little bit nicer to their neighbors. So in the present episode number 15, it's titled Gender and Nation Building After Independence 1830 or 1880. So this is the first episode in a block of 5 episodes that will round up the 19th century for us. In this episode, we're going to review 1. The failure of independence movements. 2. Themes of Soberanas Repúblicas. We're going to study an essay by Pamela S. Murray, Women and Aspects of Everyday Life, and also a second essay by also Pamela Murray, we love you, Pamela, called Gender and Nation, 1830 or 1880. Last, we're going to read an excerpt from MC Mirow, Latin American Law, this text right here. A history of private law and institutions in Spanish America, but we're going to go straight to the one page that's marked, the one page that's important for our purpose. Oh! No, that's not it. This is the real page. Yeah, women. That's where we're going to go. Okay, so now that I've just naturally and artificially shocked you, let's get to the episode. Independence movements were actually not necessarily a success for Latin America. So from 1830 to 1880s, we really see disintegration of civil values, while at the same time, the construction of civil values that turn into the 20th century. So the general trends are a continuation of colonial social and economic structures. The criollos simply replace the peninsulares. Agricultural dependence continues on Indian and African labor. Usurpation of indigenous lands by Republican regimes becomes the norm across Latin America. So actually, after independence, the Indians are doing worse because their land is being taken away. There is a parallel with the United States if you think of Manifest Destiny and if you think of Andrew Jackson, the Trail of Tears, the Oregon Trail, so on and so forth. That displacement and usurpation of land that we saw in the United States is also a pattern in Latin America. So it's not just USA. And a continuation of aristocratic values. We get a succession of caudillos. After independence, there are a lot of powerful warlords who are still high on warfare, and they take power in their respective countries or regions by charisma, power, and sometimes fear. Some of the names are José Gaspar Rodríguez Francia, he's from Paraguay, Juan Manuel Rosas, you friends in Argentina have heard plenty about Rosas, and friends in Ecuador, since we've had a streak with you, we're going to give you Gabriel Garcia Moreno. You guys don't like him either. And this succession of caudillos is actually tied to a cycle of civil wars because independence left the military and bureaucracy absolutely bloated, and these people needed to find a reason for existing. They become dependent on foreign trade to make income. So the criollo oligarchies are okay with having foreign governments like Britain dictate their national laws in exchange for investment in, I don't know, mines or guano, bird poop. We'll talk about bird poop eventually. It's the reason why Bolivia is landlocked. Yes, I can't make that shit up. Bolivia is landlocked because of bird poop. Also, regionalism, because the roads fall in disrepair and the continent is full of natural barriers. That's when you get the different nations of today. So the themes of Soberanas Repúblicas can be summarized in a few words: civil wars, gendering nationalism, industrialization, romanticism, neocolonialism, Ángel tutelar, social Darwinism, Indigenismo, abolicionismo, and first wave feminism. If you were to put those 10 items together, you can summarize 1830 to 1880s in Latin America. Let's go to Pamela Murray. Pamela in Women and Aspects of Everyday Life, 1820 to 1870, tells us that the new republics were heterogeneous groups of women with varied experiences. There's no way to make one claim that applies to everybody. This is where the modern technique or the analytical approach of intersectionality can be extremely helpful. We continued colonial patriarchal institutions, laws, and caste system into the republics, and family is the only social unit that can withstand civil wars and caudillismo. So people become really invested in protecting the family unit. Distinctions between types of women are complicated by practice. So, for example, lower class women have always worked outside of the home, even when social mores tell them otherwise. Upper class women can afford to stay at home and uphold the Iberian notion of honor. Some constants that transfer from the colonial into post-independence are patriarchy, obviously. So marriage, obedience, punishment encourages abuse. That's still part of our everyday lives. Male autonomy and impunity as head of household continues into the 20th century. And conservative Catholicism sometimes intervened in marital disputes, but it was so rare that it might as well not have been helpful at all. Catholicism. Women, because the men are disproportionately targeted by political violence in the civil wars and caudillo cycle, women are actually heads of household. One third of urban women in the major cities, so we're going to go Mexico City, Lima, Peru, Lima, Bogota, Buenos Aires, one third of the women there were heads of household because the men were simply not present. In reality, to survive, they needed to pawn family possessions oftentimes because they couldn't get a full time job. After the civil wars, economies were stagnant, men were fighting, and women acted like they were single even if they were married. So, although in terms of the law, like we saw with Manuela Sáenz, there was a rejection of women's independence, in reality, women had to fend for themselves, and that sets the stage for the 20th century. Secrecy. You actually couldn't let your neighbors know that you were economically struggling, which is why you couldn't get a job in public and you couldn't actually pawn things nearby your home. You had to go to, I don't know, outside of the city to sell your stuff. So now they would know that you don't have any money. El que dirán, we would say. Apparently, to maintain a living standard, meant to be honorable, and women traditionally manage household budgets even when the husbands were around, so it was not like this was much of a change. So, as I told you, one third of women were heads of households, and this had to do with civil war, caudillos, and political violence. Informal jobs like washing linens and sewing for other families do not provide official documentation, so it is obvious that women were doing these things to make extra money, but we don't have the statistics for it. The second essay by Pamela Murray, Gender and Nation, 1830 to 1800, we're going to take a look at several factors of the 19th century, like economic liberalism, separate spheres, literature for middle-class women, and social Darwinism. So, classic economic liberalism. People in business schools, when I teach this lesson, you always have something to say, because the moment I say Adam Smith, they go like The Wealth of Nations, 1776. And everybody remembers the concept of hands-off, laissez-faire government. Regulatory governments are unnecessary because humans are rational and apparently the economy can care for itself. Government provides only security and public services like roads, schools, and firemen. Everything else they have hands-free. They imagine that economic equality will actually balance itself out with natural equality of human beings. Well, we know that doesn't actually work out. Wealth doesn't trickle down like a fountain. It doesn't work like that. Economic inequality has nothing to do with justice. So economic liberalism actually gave us a relative improvement of gender relations in Latin America. It fostered individuality, liberty, rationality, and progress. Bourgeoisie work ethic, education with practical knowledge, so we get things like teachers and nurses out of this phenomenon, and legal reforms apply to single women and widows. So while economic liberalism by itself is not the solution to all of life's problems, for women in Latin America it gave them a brief respite. It allowed them at least to say, I am going to go out to work, if they needed to. So the next concept is the separate spheres. In the 19th century, we redefined what it means to be outside and inside, meaning men get to live public lives and women get to live domestic lives, and those two don't mix. It appeals to biology for natural qualities that justify divisions of labor and power, though we know that appealing to biology for anything at all is absolutely the wrong way to go about things, because biology doesn't care about what we think. Okay. Republican motherhood, or the new concept of Marianismo for the 19th century, features el ángel tutelar de la familia, or women are supposed to be like angels that purify those around her. So with self-sacrifice. So even getting an education, even getting a job, if you can frame it within the context of I am caring for my family and therefore caring for the nation by extension, then you have permission to fall away from the norm. So, patriarchal status quo excluded women from politics except in the informal personalist agency, like being part of a political family. So, if you were attached to a politician, you may have been able to attend salons, but still, this was still separate spheres. Literature changed actually because women were becoming readers, they were becoming workers, they were living outside of their home a little bit more often, and they were heads of household. So to entertain them, a whole genre of literature revolutionized for them. So we got practical manuals like homemaking as a vocation, clean, orderly, frugal, practical home manager. So things like Cosmopolitan magazine today can trace its lineage back to 19th century practical manuals telling women how to run their households. Romance novels or romantic novels like Novela Rosa or Novela de Cordel, and later on La radionovela and La telenovela are emerged because of classical economic liberalism and having to entertain women and paying for this. So it becomes an industry, it becomes an economy. National motherhood within this literature is not available to working class women, black, indigenous, or dark mestizas. So the novels hardly ever feature any characters from lower class extractions. Sexist socialization of national leaders. National leaders could not imagine women in academia, and this becomes the new battleground for first wave feminism. How can we get to college girls? And women writers were an urban phenomenon. So even though we're going to be focusing for the next few episodes on female writers, they are not in rural areas. So the development of feminism in Latin America is disparate. Just like it is, I think, in the United States as well. I think urban centers have always been a little bit more progressive than rural areas. Sorry, countryside. This brings us to social Darwinism, which is the 19th century's excuse to be racist. 19th century, why you so racist? You are the most racist century in the history of racism. It's pretty bad. So with social Darwinism, people seem to have a pseudo-scientific explanation why some races have economic and social advantages over others, even though we know in reality that is absolutely fake. Social Darwinism replaces Aristotle in the way to explain racism. For that, you're going to have to check out the episode on Catalina de Era Uso. I think that was episode 12 or 13. We'll put it in the notes. So survival of the fittest is not a conscious action by any living organism, let alone people. So the fact that one race has power over another does not mean that the previous one is stronger than the other. But the 19th century wanted to eat this rhetoric hook, line, and sinker. They truly believed this. Again, mutations are accidents. They're not testament to somebody's strength. So, social Darwinism became the magic ingredient for political conservatism, imperialism, and discouraging social reform. For the next section, the last topic of this lesson, we're going to go to Latin American law. Paula, at the previous episode on Manuela Sáenz and her appeal to the Peruvian Constitution of 1823, we're going to go to the correct page. And now it's a tradition. Wow, that's the one. So, 19th century political constitutional changes did little to affect the legal status of women after the independence period, rung in a new sense of equality. Even the national codification period of Mexican civil law reforms favoring women's legal rights were not successful. After studying ecclesiastical and civil records from the period, Hunefeld makes similar observations of 19th century Peru. Even though the colonial notions of law were replaced with liberal and secular bases for private law, the new system maintained the subordination of women. Colonial regimes of patria potestad and of women's property continued even into civil codes. The Peruvian Civil Code addressed dowries and considered them advancements of inheritance. A provision providing for 1/4 of the property to go to the surviving spouse on the death of the other spouse reduced the importance of dowries, and a value dowries declined in Peru during the 19th century. As discussed earlier, improving the legal status of women in Latin America will be a battle waged more in the 20th century and continue today. So Mirow argues that there is a gap in the advancement of women's rights in the legal code from 1830 to 1900. So he says during that time we had no improvement. And while that may be true in the legal system, it is not the case in literature, which is where the women and education. Literature and education is where women focus their efforts, since clearly the legal system was not caught up to date. So in today's episode, Gender and Nation Building After Independence, 1830 to 1800, we talked about the failure of independence movements, the themes of Soberanas Repúblicas. We analyzed 2 essays by Pamela Murray about social Darwinism, Ángel tutelar, and the development of women's lives after independence. And we read a little bit from Mirow to give you a little bit more insight about how the law code stagnated for us girls for a good 60 years. So in the next episode, episode 16, we're going to title it Flora Tristán, La Tapada Limeña, Tourism, Ethnography, Europhilia, 1838. And this episode is going to be based on the book titled Peregrinations of a Pariah from 1838. We'll get to analyze notions of social Darwinism and the separate spheres applied to Lima with Franco-Peruvian diva Flora Tristán. And yes, Flora Tristán is the grandmother of Paul Gauguin, the painter, so the two of them were travel fiends. Both of them were into recording their traveling, though she did it in writing and he did it in painting. The writer, activist, and socialist writes, quote, "The women of Lima are not as a rule beautiful, but there is something irresistibly attractive about their faces. There is no man whose heart does not beat faster at the sight. They are not dark-skinned, as many Europeans believe. On the contrary, the majority are very white, while the rest are different shades of brown according to their diverse origins. Their costume is unique. Lima is the only city in the world where it has ever appeared. People have consulted with most ancient chronicles, but in vain. Nobody has yet discovered its origin." So to learn more about this particular costume and how it enabled women to be a little bit more freer from patriarchy's restraints, take a look at next episode. Thank you once again for taking the time to learn more about Latin American Divas right here at Cronista de Indias, where we're going to drop episodes every Friday, except for this week where we're going to have a ridiculous amount of episodes because I have the time to record them back to back. So please hit the subscribe button so you never miss one. Also follow me on Instagram for daily content. As always, a million thanks for viewing, sharing, and liking the episodes. Do epic shit.